2 magicians shall appear in England. The first shall fear me, the second shall long to behold me. The first shall be governed by thieves and murderers, the second shall conspire at his own destruction. The first shall bury his heart in the wood beneath the snow, yet still feel its ache. The second shall see his dearest possession in the hands of his enemy. The first shall pass his life alone. He shall be his own goaler. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word. The second shall tread lonely roads, the storm above his head, seeking the dark tower upon the high hillside. I sit upon the black throne in the shadows, but they shall not see me. The rain shall make a door for me, and I shall pass through it. The stone shall make a throne for me, and I shall sit upon it. The nameless slave shall wear a silver crown. The nameless slave shall be king in a strange country. Hello, and welcome to the Green Team of the Legendarium, the weird little spin-off podcast where patrons of the Legendarium talk about books and topics the main crew hasn't gotten around to yet. I'm Little Red Book, and today I have with me the man who's finally done with this book, Cesky.
Yes, finally done is right.
The man who was pleasantly surprised by this book, Seeker42.
Hi there.
And the woman who's finally checked this book off her list, member of the main crew, Megan.
Yay! Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Megan. Before we get started, we've now completed the book. Who would you recommend this book to, and how would you rate it overall? Cesky.
I don't know if you want to start with me, but
no,
I will.
I want to get it's like bad news first.
Bad news first. I would recommend this to people who care more about writing style over plot or substance. She's very good at writing, but I don't like it. I give it a 5 out of 10 because it just doesn't work for me. Just dislike it. So
okay, Megan.
I would recommend this to people who like historical fiction and people who like, I don't know, historical novels like Charles Dickens and that sort of thing. Like based on the people that I've talked with who also enjoyed this book, that seems like a decent demographic.
Okay, Seeker.
I'm not sure.
Fair enough.
I enjoyed it, but I honestly don't know why. And this is the first book of this style that I've read in ages, since my Jules Verne and, the classic stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I give this book Cesky said 10. I would give it 5 stars out of 5. And I would recommend it to people who like period pieces. I think I said this before. It's like Terry Pratchett and Jane Austen had a baby, and this is the book. So
I would partially take offense at that you'd include Terry Pratchett with this because it was not funny enough for Terry
it was
Pratchett.
So funny.
Not funny enough for Terry Pratchett.
I think that it's got a very dry British sense of humor that maybe doesn't appeal to you.
I think I'm pretty funny in it. It's just not there. So
okay. Okay.
It had its moments, but I think I agree with Cesky. It's not Pratchett level, but it did have its moments.
Okay, fair enough.
It may not have been like the whimsical, absurdist kind of Pratchett, but it definitely had the witty commentary.
What it reminds me of, I haven't read the novels, but it reminds me of what a friend has told me about the Xanth books.
I've not read
Not
those
as funny as Pratchett, but very whimsical and stuff. But I've never read them, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's a pretty fair thing of Xanth, I think. That's very generous.
Okay, so because I didn't want to punish Cesky, I asked Seeker to do our summary. So we're entering spoilers. Seeker.
Okie doke. I didn't have as much time to polish this one this time, but here goes. It begins with the origin story of the Raven King. The sky speaks to Childermas, but he comprehendeth it not. Lady Pole tries to shoot Mr. Norrell, but wounds Childermas instead. Lady Pole is given to the care of Mr. Segundus, who sees magic around Stephen and Lady Pole. Vinculus tells Stephen that he will be a king in a strange country. Having been denied access to magical book learning by Mr. Norrell, Strange plots a new course to magical learning, a course to madness. Strange writes a book, goes to Europe, and clubs with Lord Byron. Norrell plays silly buggers with all of Strange's books. Strange meets a lady, and England goes cuckoo for magic trinkets. Strange and the Greysteel's daughter grow closer. Lord Byron becomes a friend of sorts. And Strange continues trying to summon fairies. The Greysteels visit a crazy cat lady. Strange visits a cat lady and makes a potion of madness from a half-eaten mouse. Strange succeeds in both summoning and seeing the man with the thistledown hair, much to the fairies' anger and dismay. Strange finds his way to the gentleman's home, sees his wife, and is cursed by the gentleman. The gentleman's curse manifests as a pillar of perpetual darkness. Strange cuts himself off from Mrs. Greysteel and embraces madness as his best hope of rescuing his wife. Strange writes his brother-in-law and continues to seek answers in madness. Henry Withrope, Strange's brother-in-law, shows Strange's letters to Mr. Norrell, who borrows them and leaks altered copies to the press. He then pays off Drawlight's debts so that he can send him to Venice. In Venice, Mr. Drawlight seeks information on Strange, which he can twist into vile gossip. This continues until he's kicked into a Venetian canal where some enchanted currents have been waiting to bring him face to face with Jonathan Strange. Strange puts a spell on Drawlight and returns him to sender with 3 messages. Strange then opens the doors of English magic. On a dark and stormy night, Mrs. Greysteel meets a dark stranger in the rain. A mirror appears mysteriously on her drawing room wall. English magic is popping out all over. Parliament is worried and tasks Mr. Norrell with preventing Strange from returning to England. Drawlight returns to England, delivers his messages to, and is killed by Lascelles. Is that how you pronounce that?
Something like
or
that.
Lascelles?
I call it
not the right
Lascelles,
person.
but yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
I
if
had
you've
the
listened to-
audiobook, so I just wrote it how I thought it sounded. Now I'm trying to read it, and I'm like, how did it?
I think
Anyways.
it's Lascelles. I don't know.
Lascelles,
if
yeah, I
you've
think
listened
Lascelles sounds
to-
good.
If you've listened to any of the Green Team, you know I cannot pronounce names. It's just a running thing. Okay.
As long
Go
as
ahead.
we know who you mean.
Yes. Mr. Norrell leaves for his library at Hurtview Abbey. More and more people start doing magic. Childermas picks Lady Pole's finger from Mr. Lascelles' pocket. Strange and Norrell confront each other in the library with a candlestick. Mrs. Pole is freed from her enchantment, and Childermas is hung by the gentleman. Working together, Strange and Norrell summon the Raven King. The Raven
I'm
King.
going to stop you. It's
Okay.
for Nicholas, not Childermas, that is hung by the
Oh, okay.
gentleman.
Yes.
Stephen.
Yes, the guy with the tattoos all over him.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wrong guy. Okay.
It's okay.
The Raven King revives Vinculus and writes Strange's book upon him. The air and rocks and trees pay homage to Stephen as the nameless slave. The Greysteels greet Arabella, Strange's wife, as she gets out of Fairy. Stephen becomes a king in a strange country. And I somehow forgot to mention that Childermas manages to kill Thistledown Hairman.
No, it's
Strange-
Black. Stephen Black does it.
Stephen Black. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Stephen Black does that. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
But
I
Childermas
just noticed that whole
manages-
section is completely missing from my notes.
And what Childermas does is he cuts down Verniculus and a mysterious, handsome young man restores Verniculus to life.
Right.
I love that. I love
I
it.
do. I loved it. Oh, sorry. Anyway, you finish up and then we can talk.
Okay. Strange and Norrell vanish. Government scrambles to regulate new magicians. New magicians segregate themselves into competing factions. Arabella Strange rests, recovers, and forms a close friendship with Flora Greysteel. Strange and Arabella bid each other adieu.
Indeed. Well done. So, how do you feel about all the threads and how they come together at the end of the book? Do you feel satisfied, Megan?
I do, yeah. I love all the little details of the way they came together. I have a tendency, because I was reading the actual physical book, I'll put a little bookmark in anytime I come to something I think might be important later. And so it's been fun going through the last couple of days as I prepared for this to see the tiny little threads that did end up being really important. Because, yeah, I feel like there wasn't really a lot of throwaway information. It all ended up being important later. I liked it. I was a fan. I'm a fan.
Oh, good. You even mentioned you were very concerned that Verniculus wouldn't be important at the end, I think, in the first episode. He's kind of super important.
He kind of wasn't important. It didn't affect anything.
What are you talking about? No, he's dead.
He's a book. He doesn't do anything. He gets killed. He gets revived. The book gets changed. It doesn't affect Jonathan Strange. It doesn't affect Mr. Norrell. Doesn't affect Arabella. Doesn't affect England. Nobody could read the book. It's useless and pointless. You chop it out.
I love that part of I'm a book I'm supposed to be read, not read myself.
Yeah, he doesn't change anything after he gives his prophecies and is sent out. He just keeps coming back into the story.
Well, he's important enough for the Raven King to revive him, and it kind of sounds like he's going to help teach magic in the future. Like he's going to be part of the vessel through which people understand John Usglass's will.
But the only people who can do that is the reader, which is dead, and there has to be a new one. I'll say right now, I did not like the wrapped endings. I felt like it kind of came out of nowhere. It was fine that Stephen killed the Thistledown man, but I was like, this is weird that they all hailed him as the king, and then instead of John Usgoth, which is where it was kind of they were trying to point it, and he just kills the Thistledown hair man and is like, cool, I killed him. Now I'm going to take the king and I'm going to be who I'm supposed to be, and that was nice. It was well written, but I just wasn't expecting him to kill him until he's the wind brought them to where the Thistledown hair man I'm going to take the wind. Will take me to the person who's going to kill me. The biggest obstacle in my path. Yeah, and it was. I knew it was Stephen then, but I did not.
I'm going to put a pin in that and ask Seeker what he thought about the wrap-ups.
I thought. I mean, the whole thing of Vinculus being a book, it's like an off-screen scene that constantly gets under your skin. Kind of like, I'm going to throw a Wheel of Time reference here. Okay. The off-screen conversation that Arthur Hawkwing has with the Daughter of the Nine Moons. It's like everyone's dying to know what that conversation is, but it is what it is. And I think it's similar with Vinculus. Will he be read? Will someone figure him out? Will he be part of the community? Will he ever die? All of these are questions that are left, I think, intentionally unanswered. Kind of like, who killed, what's his name? Wheel of Time reference, but I can't remember.
Oh, who killed Asmodean?
Yeah, who killed Asmodean? It was for ages, it was just what? What was his purpose? What was he there for?
Okay, so I want to go back to what Cesky was saying about. Oh, now I put a pin in it and.
About Vernaculus not being important?
No.
About Stephen?
Stephen being the one to.
So, here's the thing is the reason why, because when you're reading the book, the thistledown haired gentleman, I wish we actually had a name for him.
You could just call him the fairy, because he's the only fairy.
The fairy has Well, he's not the only fairy. He's just the only main character fairy.
Literally, like, I think the only real
He's
fairy
the only
we see.
named fairy that we
He's the
actually
only
interact
yeah,
with.
exactly. There's
Yeah.
other fairies. Anyway, the point is that he discovers Stephen's name, but he never tells Stephen his name. So the spell is fooled into thinking that Stephen is the Raven King. Does that make sense?
Mhm. I think it's fascinating that the gentleman ends up kind of creating his own doom in that way, because he's been grooming Stephen this whole time and saying, I'm going to make you a king. I'm going to make you a king. And he goes into the whole, oh, by the way, I learned your name. And here's the very convoluted way in which I learned your name and the hideous thousands of people that I murdered in order to find it. And then gets interrupted and never gets back to it. And it turns out that is his undoing.
Yep, exactly.
I feel
Such a
like
small little detail.
I feel like his undoing was everything he did, from grooming Stephen and Lady Pole, and he keeps going after Strange, and he's like, if you just left Strange alone and just never answered his summons, he probably would have not done anything. You know, they wouldn't have tried to contact John Uskoth, which would give Stephen the power, right? They would have just. I think I just agreeing with you, Megan. I think he was his own downfall, most
Yes.
like the whole way.
Well,
the
if
whole
he had
way.
never kidnapped Strange's wife, Strange would have never become obsessed and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
And I think it's
exactly.
fascinating that he's under the constraints of the magic. Like when Stephen says, give me whatever, and I can't think of the exact words, but when
It was
the
Norrell,
gentleman
actually.
ends
Or
up
it
having
was
to
Strange,
give Jonathan Strange the finger,
Mhm.
the lady's finger, and I can't think of her name.
Lady
Pole.
Yeah, right. But it's kind of one of the things where he's like, well, I don't want to do that, but I'm constrained under the rules of magic that since you asked me, I have to do it.
Yeah, I promise
Just kind
you
of
anything.
these things end up happening. Yeah, he just the fairies are supposed to be the ones that are so cunning and can undermine humans and come up with ways to get what they want. Which, you know, in the first section, the fairy is successful. He gets exactly what he wants in his own way, and Norrell is horrified. And then in that third section, like Strange ends up out. Well, yeah, Strange and Uskoth, end up being the ones to outthink the fairy in order to win.
So one of the things I find most fascinating about Stephen Black's character is that he is constantly vacillating between wanting to kill people or shun the English
Mm-hmm.
and just being so upset at the damage that he's watching the fairy do that he is incapable of stopping.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's it's true to human nature that if you can't see the people or hear the people you want to you're okay with them hurting and suffering, but as soon as he starts hearing about like all the ways they're actually dying and suffering, and you know, like then he starts realizing, oh, you know, this is real. He can still hate the English as a whole, but then as soon as it's like, oh yeah, I just had to I had to get the essence of breath from these 72 women that were kissed by the captain. And he's like, oh, is that easy? He's like, well, yeah, it is after they're dead. And he's like, oh, like that just it makes it hit home more like these are people versus the English, or, you know, these people who've taken things away from him, right?
Oh,
Well, he
absolutely.
even-
That's why charities focus on pictures of individuals and especially children rather than talking about a village or a city. You know, it goes back to that. I think it's one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic.
Oh,
Mhm.
sure.
Way to quote Lenin.
Is that where that came from?
Yes.
I did not
Because
know
Lenin,
that.
it might have been Stalin, but I'm pretty sure it was Lenin. No, but he even has thoughts that against Sir Pole at times when he's with the fairy. He gets mad about Sir Pole, and he's like, why should I care what he thinks, and blah 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 blah, and he's made me a slave in name only. But then when he starts thinking about what the fairy wants to do, he shies back. He draws back from that. And
Right.
You know, okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Childermass. How awesome is he?
Oh, that was one of my favorite payoffs.
He's my favorite
Was
character, by
Yeah.
the way.
I was kind of expecting something. I kind of thought he might be the Raven King in disguise at the beginning of the book, because there's just there's more to him at the beginning than what he's showing, but he doesn't do any magic, and then he kind of learns some magic, or does it, and I liked him. I felt like Lascelles was like a huge 100% turn. He was like, I'm here for the high society, and then he's like, I'm going to straight up murder everybody now.
Oh my
I
gosh,
love
right?
his ending.
Like I'm just like, I'm going to start murdering. Yeah, I liked his ending too. That was
Yeah, his was definitely the most satisfying ending. And I like the whole crime and punishment routine, And he's like, I'm not going to become morbid and depressed and go crazy. No, you're just going to become a homicidal lunatic.
yeah.
He becomes part of the spell.
Yeah.
Who are you? I'm the champion of the castle of the plot eye.
Right,
Yeah.
and I love that Childermass comes back and he's like, "What? This dude challenged you and you didn't fight back? You're such a coward, blah, blah, blah."
I'm here to defend the honor of England.
Well, and like Childermass, the thing that I think is cool about him is we think at first that he's in service of Mr. Norrell, but in truth, he's a servant of magic. He's the servant of John Uthglas, and he wants to bring magic back. Like, he has a little bit of it. It's like, well, he can't be in the service of Mr. Norrell for as long as I have and not pick something up. But he also has a conversation with Jonathan Strange, where Strange says, well, you're Norrell's man. He's like, no, if you and Mr. Norrell fight and you lose and Mr. Norrell wins, then I will be the enemy, because there always has to be there has to be that opposition. There has to be those two sides. And he's like, but if you fight Mr. Norrell and you win, then I will fight you. Like, he just wants to make sure that there's a balance.
And that magic never becomes monolithic.
Right.
Exactly. Because you have these two magicians where Norrell really wants to, he's all learning and hoarding that for himself. And then you have Strange, and he's all about, I want to share the magic with the world, and I want to teach as many people as possible. And there are pros and cons to both of that, which I think Childermass understands. But also, I love that he's just like, he's got these little pickpockety ways. And he, finds Vinculus, and he's going to rescue him. Like, it just, he cares, and he kind of sees the bigger picture than anybody else does.
I forget who said it to whom, but there's this one quote where somebody says, "You are the spell John Uthglas is weaving."
That's what Childermass says, I think.
Childermass says that.
And
to Jonathan Strange and Norrell, yeah. Well, and just to the point, Childermass is always saying, I'm of the Raven King. I'm the Raven King's man. But then he does meet the Raven King, and he's like, well, didn't you say you were mine? He's like, I don't know who you are. Like, get out of here.
I know, right?
Leave me alone. Yeah. Like, I'm trying to rescue this guy who's dead. And he's like, well, okay. And the Raven King, I'm obviously...
That was one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, he's just like, I know what's going on, and you're fine. Like, just, be magicked over there for a few minutes while I finish this other important thing, so...
Yeah, I need you, but not this moment.
Yeah.
So, just real quick, going back to Stephen, I do feel sorry for the shopkeeper girl
Yeah.
who was in love with him. It was kind of sad. Because
Well, I was sad that... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, she was in love with him, and I think Stephen was in love with her, and then just crap goes wrong, and it's just sad to me. The whole situation.
Yeah, you have these three people that the gentleman with thistledown hair kind of, enchanted, and all three of them, you get to the end of the book and you kind of see how their lives diverged. Because, Arabella comes home and she doesn't have a husband. And she's also just like, I don't know who I am anymore. And then Lady Poole kind of has her, where she comes back and she's immediately just so angry and wants everyone to know what has happened to her. Like, to the point where she's like, where I can't remember who's saying, we should probably tell your husband you're home. And she's like, it doesn't matter. We have to write to these newspapers. This is important.
Yeah, it's
we have to get to the gossip column first. That's what's important. Gossip.
Well, no, and Lady Poole is trying to, because it's Lady Pole and Mr. Secundus, and this is right when her enchantment is broken.
Yes.
And she's like, no, we need to tell the world how evil Mr. Norrell is.
Well, I don't know if I don't think Mr. Norrell was evil. I think he was just misguided, and he should have not attempted to bring her back to life.
Yeah.
But I
Especially
mean,
not in the way that he did.
He's kind of evil. I'm sorry.
Is that evil?
No, what he does, the way he manipulates that whole thing is what's evil. And the way he manipulates he had all these people who wanted to he wanted to learn, and he just wouldn't. And they'd be like, oh, there's no magicians. I'm so sad that there's no magicians. And then, and he let himself get seduced by Drawlight and Lascelles. And yeah, I think he didn't necessarily start off as evil, but
how much selfish of that, and weak.
Yeah, I think he was just a little bit more weak, but how much of that is also just the way it had to be for the Raven King spell? Because he is the spell, right? Like, so he has to be fearful, right? And Jonathan Strange has to be arrogant with his magic, right?
Do you think they were like manipulated to be that way, or do you think they were just that way naturally, and so that's why they were chosen?
It sounded to me like they were the workings of the spell, like he had created them or kind of set them in motion to be the way they were, so that magic would come back to England. You know, that was the spell that the Raven King was working, and it had to be through them. But that's how I took it. But
and I think that's fair. I'm just saying that
he did a lot of bad things, but I think he was really heavily influenced by Lascelles, who was much more dirty.
Definitely a bad guy.
Who was much dirtier than the first two sections make you think.
Well, yeah, between Lascelles and Drawlight, like, he was definitely led in the wrong direction.
But see, so Jonathan Strange says something very revealing to Dr. Greysteel. He says, I thought Norrell just lied to me. He lied to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the whole fairy magic, like, he knew that Strange was fine to play along with Norrell. But when he found out that Norrell had literally been keeping magic out of the hands of the normal person who could have wielded it, that's where...
I mean, he kind of knew that all along, because he knew that Mr. Norrell was buying all the books the whole time and, keeping it out of people's hands that way.
But seeing his wife in Lost Hope, I think that's when it really hit him. Like, the very bad things that Mr. Norrell had done.
Well, I think what happened there is he realized that Norrell had trafficked with fairies.
Right.
And up until then, he thought that Norrell had nothing to do with them, because Norrell was always preaching against them. And he'd been dying to try to learn magic from them. And then to see his wife there, as well as, Mrs. Pole, and realize that, wait a minute, this all happened. Norrell had something to do with this fairy, and that's, it, and then pretended that he would never traffic with them.
Right.
I think.
And that.
Sorry, you go ahead, Red.
I was going to say, and that's why I'm tending towards Mr. Norrell's actually pretty evil. Maybe he didn't start that way, but you take the step down the road of corruption.
Yeah. Well, it is an interesting conversation what we were with the prophecy, because is someone evil if free will does not exist in their case? Do they have a choice if what they do is preordained? And it's a fascinating thing to talk about. But
to put it in theological terms, are you an Arminian or are you a Calvinist?
I was going to say one thing just about the fairy and Strange and Norrell, kind of while we're talking about them. In the first section of the book, in the first volume, when Jonathan or Mr. Norrell meets the fairy's all upset because there's not Mr. Strange. Jonathan Strange isn't there with him, right?
Right.
But then at the same time, like, the rest of the book, they never get together. They're never all three at the same spot at the same time. And while they are antagonists to each other or enemies of each other, they never really the fairy directly conflicts with Strange, and Strange, just wants to learn from the fairy. I thought, kind of based on the first volume section of the book, that there'd be more, headbutting, or like, oh, we're going to call the fairy, and then he's going to try and trick us, and we're going to try and trick him. But there was just none of that, right? It was the fairy's kind of doing his thing, Jonathan Strange is doing his thing, and then they kind of overlapped a little bit every so often, right? Does that make sense?
I think that's why the fact that like Stephen Black is the one who ultimately destroys the man with thistledown hair, while it makes sense within the story, it's a little bit less satisfying because you really want it to be these two magicians. Like you want, like they are the reason that Stephen is able to destroy the man with thistledown hair. But I kind of was like, oh, I guess they don't destroy it. Like they do, but they don't. I don't know.
I agree with you 100%. Like, yeah, that was like it was set up that they were going to be the ones to do it or stop it, but then they are, but they aren't. But they're the cause of the Thistledown Man getting all the power anyway, or Mr. Norrell is. Oh, and just this was the funniest thought I had while I was reading it when Jonathan or Mr. Blackwell, takes the crown and the staff and he walks into Last Hope and he's like, I'm the king now. It reminded me of Riddick with the you keep what you kill, because he kills the Thistledown Man hair and then he walks in and is like, I'm the king now, and everybody's like, you're the king now, you killed him, you took over his spot, like, and it just was funny and in my mind, and obviously she wasn't going for that, but like, that's so often true of like fairy tales, is like, if you defeat that person, you kind of take their spot.
So what I'm going to say is that he is told he is king when he walks into the castle. He's very confused. And he thinks of himself as the man who used to be Stephen Black.
Yeah, that's what he says. Castle. Yeah, he used to be.
So, that poor shopkeeper lady. I liked her.
I know. Well, I guess I never really finished this thought when I talked about the consequences of the three people who were enchanted, where Stephen Black really thought his life was going to go one way, and then it was just completely he was the one. Like, he kind of seemed incidental at the beginning to, oh yeah, let's enchant this servant, and now he's gonna be, and then it turns out that the servant is really the one whose life was changed the most. It just complete 180 from what he thought it was going to be.
Oh, another point to Norrell being evil, he disappears all of Jonathan Strange's books.
Oh, I know, right?
That was just petty and funny. That was one of the things I laughed at. After you buy the book, it disappears after a while, and then it gets erased. Like,
he's like, and then he says to Strange when they're in the library together, he's like, well, actually, there's one copy left in my library, because he was the only person who had a copy left.
To be fair, in Mr. Norrell's defense, he's willing to pay everybody back for the copies of the book. He just doesn't want anyone to have it.
What I found
just kind of like
humorous and sad.
He doesn't want anyone to have anything.
No, he doesn't.
Is his open letter for the reasons he did it just strike me as the basic excuse for almost all well-intentioned censorship is, oh, well, you can't handle it. It's got stuff that, you wouldn't understand if you read it.
Yeah. Which, I don't know, Mr. Norrell just thinks that he's the smartest person and everything is so well-intentioned, and yet, like, those are the choices that end up being his undoing. Like, not telling anybody about the fairy turns out to be...
But, I mean, especially amongst religious communities, isn't that always the excuse for don't watch that movie, don't read that book? Yeah. You won't understand it, or it'll be a bad influence, or something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, any community. It doesn't even have to be a religious community.
Well,
whatever.
I'm familiar with religious communities, so...
That's fair enough. Fair enough. Let's talk about Jonathan Strange a little bit. How did you guys feel about him purposely inducing madness in himself?
Yeah, I thought that was a smart way to do that, where it's like, yeah, you have to be a little crazy to see fairies. Now, going to the crazy cat lady and like trying to absorb her madness and then eating a dead mouse, that was like, no, thank you, please. I'm gonna toss this to the side for a few minutes. But like, that wasn't fun. I loved the madness scenes where when he's experimenting and he's like, oh, I put 9 drops in, and then all of a sudden I was wondering whether everybody had candles in their heads. But,
How does he talk with that Coke, with that pineapple in his mouth?
Yeah, the pineapples was the funniest one to me, because I'm like, it's just hilarious. Like, everywhere he goes, he sees pineapples everywhere. And then when it's worn off, he sees like a real pineapple being cut, and he's like, oh, pineapple, like, keep that one away from me. Like, I've seen too many. So,
and then he makes a spell to repel all pineapples, and people are getting injured by projectile pineapple.
I love. And then, like, they go and talk to the Duke of Wellington, and they're like, "Hey, Strange has gone crazy." He's like, "Oh, I'm sure it's fine. Whatever. I'm sure he has a reason to be
He's
crazy."
always a bit nuts,
right?
It was so
That was one of my very favorite parts. I'm like, the people that know him the best are like, man, he's probably fine. Sounds like him.
I was a
Sounds like
little
something
unsure
he would
why
do.
he had to be mad 24/7, but like, or like to work his magic, because he did that just fine before he was mad.
No,
But-
it's to see the fairy. That's the only reason why he's crazy.
Well,
I know, but
think-
he takes it all the time. He doesn't
Yeah, I
just take
think
it when
he
he's going to
was-
see the fairy. He takes it all the time.
I think he was gaining magical insight while he was crazy, because his magic took quantum leaps evolutions off screen.
Yeah.
I seriously have to find that quote from the well. Talk amongst yourselves about this.
Okay.
I felt like chapter 62 should have been cut completely. And this section again should have been cut by a half to a third.
The madness
What is
section.
chapter 62?
Say chapter
Oh,
62 is all about the Grey Steels and them talking about amongst themselves. I think it's the one where the mirror appears. And I'm like, couldn't this have been like 3.5 paragraphs instead of 4.5 pages of them talking and being like, oh, it's rainy outside, and now we're gonna walk inside, and what do you mean it's rainy outside? It's perfectly clear, and where'd this mirror come from? Did you buy it? Was it expensive? How did you get it here? Nobody cares. Just say there's a mirror and it magicked itself on the wall.
I went out to buy cross-stitch silk in the middle of a pouring rainstorm.
Yeah, it was like
It was a weirdly convoluted way of like letting you know what was going on without actually letting you know what was going on, because she couldn't come right out and be like, and then this was happening, because it would have spoiled a lot of surprises. But yeah, I really liked that family group. I liked those characters a lot, but the chapters where it was just those characters were not always the most interesting to read.
well,
Throw
they
in
come
Lord Byron, sure.
Yeah, they come in at the third section, and they only tangentially relate to Mr. Strange, or to Jonathan Strange. So when they're not, it's just them, it's like, why do we care about these people? They're like side characters.
Yeah.
Don't shake your head at me, Red. You know it's true.
I'm saying I love it. I don't care that they're side characters, as you call them. It's called character development, okay? Like,
Well, and as somebody who loves Charles Dickens, they felt very Dickensian, where I'm just like, of course you have these random characters that show up that are like taking care of him, and the people that are on his side, because he needed some friends who were out of the country while he was out of the country.
Yeah. I've made a resolution to not read more historical fantasy unless it's highly recommended, and not by Red, because
fair enough.
This is my second one, and I've ranted on both of them about things I disliked about them.
Well,
what was the other one that I recommended to you?
Shades of Milk and Honey. No, we just read it together.
Oh, I was going to say I did not recommend that.
No, and I liked it, but I didn't like the
romance.
historical parts, right? Like, I don't agree with 18th century stupidity. We all have to wear wigs because we're so dumb, and how dare somebody see our real hair?
I highly recommend for historical Patrick O'Brien and Bernard Cornwell.
I don't think that Cesky would be down with that. I really
They're both
second
military
Patrick O'Brien.
historical.
Yeah, I second Patrick O'Brien. I'm a big fan of the Master and Commander books.
I still don't think that Cesky.
I really like the
those
sharp
books.
novels from Bernard Cornwell, as well as the King Arthur Warlord trilogy.
So I found the quote.
Oh, good.
Okay. The watermen who carry fruit from the mainland to the city say that the pineapples fly out of their boats as if they have been fired out of a cannon, said the Lord Sidmouth. Of course, they carry all sorts of other fruits as well, apples, pears, and so on. None of these occasion the least disturbance, but several people have been injured by the flying pineapples. Why the magician should have taken such a dislike to this particular fruit, no one knows. The Duke was not impressed. None of this proves anything. I assure you, he did much more eccentric things in the peninsula. But if he is indeed mad, then he has some reason for being so. I just love that.
Yeah.
Me too.
He doesn't seem to dislike the other fruit. I don't know
What's
going
interesting
on.
too, like that quote where Wellington refers to his men as like the scum of the earth or something like that.
Yep.
That's an actual quote.
Yep. It is.
Oh, the poem that they're like, oh yeah, Lord Byron wrote this poem about Jonathan Strange. That poem is a real poem.
Oh no.
Oh yeah.
Oh well, I didn't know that.
That's also
but
real.
I was referring to I don't know if it's the first third or not, but when we first meet Wellington and we're learning about him, somebody says something like, how does he like his troops when he calls them the scum of the earth? And it's like, well, that's his kind of weird compliment for them or something like that. He actually does like them and he despises them at the same time.
Sorry, I was just adding to the fact that she kind of used some actual historical. Yeah, there's some things that are actually true of our history that she used.
Yeah.
Like the summer of 1816 being all gray and cloudy and covered in dust. So it just felt like winter and everybody stayed inside the whole time.
I just love that. I love that Byron's hanging out with Jonathan Strange in his Tower of Darkness taking notes. Oh, Cesky's gone. He's probably glad.
I love that Byron and Strange get along because they both like to fight with people.
Yes. Oh, and going back to the Greystales, this poor girl who's clearly in love with Jonathan Strange. What does she do? She saves his wife. I just thought that was really sweet.
Well, yes, and she saves his wife, and then she becomes the best friend and kind of the person to bring her back to herself. I love the moment at the end where Arabella says, what does she say? I really do not remember what I was like before. And so Flora responds, then I will tell you, you were always cheerful, though often left to your own devices. You were hardly ever out of temper, though often severely provoked. Your every speech was remarkable for its wit and genius, though you never got credit for it and almost always received a flat contradiction. Arabella laughed. Heavens, what prodigy I was. But I'm not inclined to put much trust in his portrait since you never saw me. Mr. Strange told me. Those are his words. And I love that because I'd actually, in the first section where we first meet Arabella, there's a little sketch of her character. And it's not word for word, but it is basically the same thing where it's like, it's not just Jonathan Strange making it up. Like that is what she was like. And so I just kind of appreciated that it came full circle for her where this woman is going to be able to help her figure out who she is. Which, if you've been through any kind of trauma, it's nice to have somebody there who believes in you.
Yes. Yeah. So my sister and I were not friends before things went really badly with my parents' health, and now we are. And that trauma is what made us become friends. And so I really identify with that idea that having somebody and I always knew she had my back even when we weren't friendly. But the point is like having that, like people who should be opposed to each other, but because they share a trauma and a loss, they come together is a real thing. Does that make sense?
I think so too. Yes. Well, because Strange could have easily sent Arabella to her brother. He could have sent her to so many other people. And he's like, no, Flora's the one that's going to be able to understand and love and appreciate her through this. Because Flora didn't know her before. So she's not going to be able to say, well, this is how you're supposed to be. She's going to figure out who she is now after all of this has happened.
I never thought of it that way before, Megan. You're so smart.
Thank you. That's a very nice thing to say.
We've talked about all this stuff. Let's do some favorite moments or favorite scenes. We've already covered a couple of them. Cesky, we can't hear you, dude.
Yep, Cesky's got nothing.
Yeah, he's like, I hate it all. Everything is terrible. We can't hear you, dude.
No, we
Sorry,
don't
I
hear
got
you.
a different mic button muted. Sorry. So I was just
Oh,
gonna
there you
ask
go.
I was gonna ask a question because I read the ebook, and in my ebook copy, I swear it was like 3 paragraphs, one person talking, a regular space, and then a different person with a different scene, and then 3 paragraphs that it would go back to somebody else. Was there a little bit more of a like a separator between point of views and the physical or the audiobook?
In the
So
physical
Audiobooks,
book,
no.
yes. Well, in
Sorry,
the
Megan.
physical book, yes, in that kind of in the same way as like if you're reading, I was going to say The Wheel of Time, but I listened to the audiobooks for that, where it's kind of like it'll be like space, a couple of like space,
Right.
and now here's a
It'll
new
be like a
section, and
double
then
or
space, space,
triple
space.
space, and then the next person. Okay, because it
Yeah.
wasn't like that for me. So I'd be reading, and I'd be like, okay, they're doing this, and then all of a sudden, it would be like somewhere completely different, and I'd be like, I'd be like, oh wait, this is something completely different. I have to go back and read because I missed the transition. That's all. So
So the physical copy also, in places, will transfer to italics besides the extra spaces
Yes.
to help you know what's going on.
did not get
Like
that.
the whole
Still.
description where Jonathan Strange first loses his mind is all in italics. And then it goes back to normal when he comes to himself.
Hmm.
In audio, that's just a hazard of that form of media. Is you don't get italics, you don't get anything like that. There's rarely. Some books don't even have chapter breaks, and you just have to really pay attention to who's doing what where to
Yeah.
follow along. Otherwise, you're always lost. This book was a little bit harder than many, but
I don't know. I mean, I see what you're saying. I think that for the medium of audiobooks, it did a pretty darn good job of letting you at least get the feel of when it's a footnote or when it's a this or that.
Mhm.
At least that was my experience with it. But of course, I read the book like 3 times before I listened to the
what was
audiobook.
nice about it is, yes, all the chapters were titled, and so that made it, when it was a chapter break, it made it much easier to spot. But within a chapter, if it changed locations or changed people, it would sometimes be tricky to see what was going on. Or if you just happen to space out, like my brain automatically tunes out chapter numbers, and so
Ew.
sometimes I don't realize we're in the next chapter.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's one of, I love reading and I love listening to audiobooks, but that is kind of one of the reasons why when I'm doing a podcast, I'm like, I need to read it because I do zone out pretty easily. To answer your question, Little Red, one of my favorite scenes in this book was after Mr. Drawlight talks with Dr. Greysteel and realizes he's not going to get Dr. Greysteel, so he just starts spreading rumors about Strange and everywhere. And then he approaches Frank, Dr. Greysteel's servant, and is, kind of starts spewing venom. And Frank is like, "Oh, hey, I want to show you something. Come over to the waterfront with me. Just kind of like it's over here. No, look over here," and just pushes him in the water. That scene gave me so much joy. Well, and the fact that then like the water grabs him and takes him to Strange, and this like it just becomes like this really big scene where I'm like, did Frank know that was going to happen? Probably not. But I just love that Frank had the presence of mind and cared so much. It just, I don't know, it was another one of those that brought a lot of things together. Where the Greysteels were possibly the only people in Europe who are actually on Jonathan Strange's side, and just we're not going to have it. And also Drawlight totally deserved it because he was a terrible human being.
Yep.
Oh, and I love how Strange introduces Drawlight to the trees and thistles and
oh yeah. And then when Drawlight gets killed and he's basically turned into what his nightmare was, like almost instantly. That was great. Cesky, do you have a scene that you would like to share with us?
Just one scene, or you want me to give you a top 3 after
Just
one at a time?
we're gonna round table or round robin it. So a scene for now.
A scene I liked the book theft scene where everybody's coming in and like the books are all gone, they're being stolen. Like I bought 2 copies already, and this is madness that you keep doing this. And it's like, well, I'm not doing this. Like, I liked that scene a lot. That was fun.
Okay. So I'm gonna go with the scene where Childermass and Segundus go to Lady Pole and how they see all the different, like they see the Lost Hope overlaid
Yes.
on the house she's in.
Mm-hmm.
And they see 2 Lady Poles sitting there, and one starts telling the crazy story and the other one is telling her saying what's actually happening to her. And they put Childermass holds the finger up to Lady Pole's hand and has Segundus speak the spell to restore her. And she's free. I love that.
Yeah. Well, finally, Segundus gets to be a practical magician.
Finally. Seeker?
I think my favorite scene is the duel with the guard of the plucked eye and the whatever heart. I just something about that scene I really enjoyed.
So creepy.
Creepy and so like poetic justice, I guess.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's
so appropriate.
He doesn't even realize it at the time. He's just like, he kills him and does his stuff. And he turns around immediately. He's like, I'm the champion, like he's always been. Like,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Megan? Let's
see. Another one of my favorite scenes is one we've already kind of talked about, where Childermass discovers Vinculus's body and meets John Usglass without recognizing him. I just thought that was a really beautifully written scene, and really like it was a cool scene for me as a reader because I knew what was happening, but he didn't so much, and I was just, I don't know, I just really like Childermass.
Cesky? Do you have another one for us, or are you done?
Oh, I've got other ones. Seeker took my one of my other ones with the Lascelles, but I also liked the scene where Stephen Blacklight's, he's riding his horse, and then his horse spooks, and the horse breaks his back, which I was like, okay, I've never heard of that, but I'll go with it, right? And then I'm like, oh, at least you didn't kill the horse. And then the farmer shows up and is like, here, let me teach you how to shoot your horse so that you could be fine. And then the farmer's trying to console him. He's like, well, your master will just have to buy a new horse, and hopefully he doesn't take it out too hard. And he's like, well, that was my horse, like my personal horse that I bought. And he's like, well, sorry, like it's dead now. And like, that was funny and sad. As I was like, oh, we this third section is going dark. We're gonna just kill the horse straight off.
I'm pretty sure that's what I don't even know if they can do that now. I've heard from people, like if a horse breaks its leg, the way the horse is built, there's nothing that can be done for it. So a back has got to be worse.
Yeah, it's there's not a lot we can do for horses when they break things, unfortunately. I mean, was it like 3 or 4 years ago? There was that. It was a winner of one of the Kentucky Derby, broke his leg in it and had to be put down. And they tried for about 3 weeks, but they couldn't set things right. It's really sad.
Yeah, you'd have to sedate a horse for a really long time to keep them still long enough.
Right.
Now I want to go into really random facts that I know about horses, but I will stop.
Oh, no, don't, please.
You're like, Megan, that is not what we need from you. You're welcome.
So, my next one is when after he puts the mouse in his mouth.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
First
God.
of all, I love that he gave the crazy old lady what she wanted.
Turned her into a cat.
And I thought that was great. I loved it. It was like, oh, you know what? I'm actually going to do something different. I'm going to say the scene where Jonathan Strange goes into Lost Hope and he meets his wife and Lady Pole, and Lady Pole's like, "Did you come here to save us?" And he's like, "No, because I didn't. I thought not." And they walk off, and just that heartbreaking where he's like, all he wants to say is, "I didn't even know you guys were here. I didn't. That's why I'm not here to save you." And it's just his heartbreak.
I think that's the center of. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and like the fact that they walk away because poor Lady Pole has been dealing with this affliction for 10 years at that
something
point.
Like that.
And she tells Arabella, like, having hope is the worst part. Just don't have hope. Don't even think about it. And so when Strange says, "Yeah, no, I'm not here to rescue you," they're like, "Well, okay." And they just, can't have hope, so they have to walk away.
I think that would have been the acceptable white lie time, where you say, "Yes, I am here to rescue you, but I don't have much time, and I don't really have a good plan at this time, but I'll come back."
I think he was just so.
He was so taken aware, and I just like, if there's a time to lie in a book, that's the time. Like, yes, of course I'm here to save you. I love you. I'm here for you. Not no, what? Like, that's all.
I think that Lady Pole's reaction is very interesting because she almost acts as if everyone with the possible ability to save her knew about her but had chosen not to do anything.
Right.
Mm-hmm. While at the same time knowing she can't tell anybody. It's yeah.
She had to have felt so helpless.
I think that she lost hope.
Yeah.
Because she was living at lost hope.
Which is why oh my gosh.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, that just blew my mind a little. Yep. That's why it's called that.
Do you have another scene?
The library. When Norrell first enters the library and he's all terrified of what Strange is going to do to him, and just that whole interaction and the whole scene as they, kind of work past their initial whatevers and start working together and then realize they're both trapped. And
awesome. I love that. I love that scene. And the fact that he's expecting Strange to yell at him or hurt him in some way. He's like, all I want is to get my wife out of Barry. That's all
Strange
I want.
is so far past that. He's like, well, I was mad, but it's not important.
Right.
Crazy now, so nothing matters anymore.
Yeah.
Megan, your last
one.
That
was going to be my third one.
Okay. Cesky, are you done?
Nope, I've got another one. I mean, there were a lot of like silly fun parts that I liked, but I liked at the end where Jonathan. I mean, you don't even see Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell working together after the end of the book. But when Arabella's talking and she's like, "Oh, I knew Mr. Strange and Jonathan and Mr. Norrell and Mr. Strange would get back together. Like, they're two peas in a pod. They both love magic above anything else. They might fight and bicker, but they're basically like brothers in magic. That's just who they are." And she's like, "I thought we'd only be gone a month, and we were gone like a year or something." And just the way I like that they're like, yeah, they are together. And then with Mr. Strange talking to her when they meet, he's just like, "Oh well, yeah, we're definitely working on that cure to like the blackness around me, but we found this really other exciting thing that we were working on first because." We were up against a wall for sure on that other one. We tried so hard, and we're definitely trying so hard to solve all day long. Not this other thing that's really cool. That one thing, And it's just like, you guys are just like, you just have to laugh and chuckle and be like, you guys doing your thing. Like, of course you are.
That was my favorite. And that's my favorite scene, the very end of the book where, he said, "One day I shall find the right spell and banish the darkness. And on that day, I will come to you. Yes, on that day. I will wait until then." He nodded and seemed to be about to depart, but then he hesitated. "Belle," he said, "don't wear black. Don't be a widow. Be happy. That is how I wish to think of you. I promise. And how shall I think of you?" He considered for a moment and then laughed. "Think of me with my nose in a book." They kissed once. He turned upon his heel and disappeared into the darkness.
Yeah, that was
so good.
I laughed at that too. With the "think of me with my nose in a book," like that's
So,
It's a very self-aware moment.
yeah. So, we got asked by a couple of our listeners about the miniseries.
Oh.
And just comparing it to the book. I think that Megan and I are the only ones who have watched it.
I watched half of the first episode today.
So, Megan, how do you feel? Just from your vague memories, it's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect.
I know. I remember so very little about it. I remember that I really liked it, and I was fascinated by the whole concept, and I thought that the casting of the gentleman with the thistle down here was brilliant. Every time that guy pops up on the BBC stuff, I'm just like, yes, that guy. I don't know his name. But I'm a fan of historical fiction and kind of that style. I thought it was beautifully shot. I remember really enjoying it to the point where, when I found out there was a book, I really wanted to read the book. So it was kind of the impetus for me wanting to do that. Also, I heard the book was good.
It is. It's a brilliant book. And actually, I think this is one of the better adaptations. It doesn't quite reach the BBC Pride and Prejudice good.
Okay.
But it's very, very, very close. The only thing that really bothered me about the miniseries is that it does not capture what Cesky and I were talking about the very end of the book.
Oh.
So at the end of the miniseries, you get this feeling that, he really does want to get out of the darkness. But at the end of the book, you get the feeling that if I get around to it.
Yeah.
And that really bothered me because I think there's this
so many tangents that they forget,
It's like there's kind of like this. Arabella is just so sweet and selfish, just accepting that it's over, and she's got her buddies and she's going to figure it out. And Jonathan Strange is pretty much saying it's kind of over too. And that's not the feeling you get at the end of the miniseries. So,
well, and it's kind of the difference between, Arabella was definitely kidnapped into Lost Hope. She was kidnapped into the fairy world and wanted desperately to escape it. And now you have Jonathan, who really sure where he is. Is he in the fairy realm? I don't know. But he's not he may or may not have chosen to go there, but he's not so bothered because it was kind of his choice. It's a place where he belongs, whereas she didn't belong in fairy. So I can see her just kind of being like, I know you don't really belong there, but I know that it probably suits you, so I can let you go.
Okay, so it looks like we need to wrap up. Cesky's waving at his lady, I think. So, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You can join the conversation on Reddit or on Discord. Please consider supporting the Legendarium via Patreon. The music is Galactic Damages by Jingle Punks. Thanks, Craig, for loaning us a little corner of your media empire, and for Horizon Brave starting this all. For Cesky, Seeker, and Megan, I'm Little Red Book. Have a good night.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Megan, are you going to say goodbye?
I'm sorry. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Is it just you and me today?
No, our boys are running late.
Oh, that's allowed. So happy to not be the last one this one time.
Cesky!
I can't hear you, but you can hear me, it looks like. I'm not going to update my computer at this time.